Hey there, you awesome people. I hope your day has been nothing short of fantastic. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you're totally vibing with this what if scenario, drop me a comment and let your thoughts be known. And while you're at it, don't miss out on other mind-blowing what ifs on this channel. Alright, without further ado, let's dive straight into this video. Izuku coughed, sputtering as he hunched over. Ah, Izuku. It was a good talk we had the other day. I apologize for the rough transport. But new quirks take a lot of practice. Now then, where to next? Nejire could feel Izuku's gently squeeze on her hands disappearing as he was consumed by the black substance. It was teleportation by someone other than Kurogiri. One of the pros called out. No, wait, where was the other location, the one tracked by the students? Nejire called out. There's an abandoned warehouse in the ward. I will head there in a moment, All Might responded before Nejire cut him off. I'm going now, she said bluntly, using her quirk to propel her upwards. It wasn't long before she noticed a plume of dust rising into the air and, facing towards it, she put her arms behind her and propelled. She faintly heard the elder hero grumbling about young heroes these days, but paid it no mind as she focused on her goal. She was about halfway there when All Might appeared beside her. Hop on my back, young Hato. Save your energy, All Might said. Nejire nodded sharply and used a small blast of her own quirk to position herself on the muscular man's back. Once Nejire was on his back, All Might effectively kicked the air behind him, propelling the two directly towards the scene. To say it was bad would be an understatement. Below them was an incredibly intimidating man wearing a surprisingly clean suit in the middle of the broken warehouse. Out the one's front they could see unconscious bodies of several pros, along with the body of Best Jeanist, who, despite having a massive hole in his torso, still seemed to be alive, judging the faint rise and fall of his chest. Some medics were doing their best to evacuate him from the scene, and it seemed to be working as the main dude had his attention on his wrist. Meanwhile, they could also see Izuku fighting the primary members of the League of Villains, using carefully directed blasts of his lightning to halt villain advances, whilst also avoiding many ranged attacks. He made sure to destroy any of Toga's blades, and any of Twice's doubles that came too close got annihilated immediately. An unspoken plan came to the mind of the two in the air, as All Might lined himself to propel at the man in the suit, whilst Nejire hopped off and landed behind Mr. Compress, shooting him with a spiral in his chest and taking him out. She locked eyes with Izuku and he nodded. Nejire could see his lightning arsing from his own body, indicating it was being redirected before he zipped over to her, avoiding the villains. The couple stood side by side, glaring at the villains. The portal guys still seemed down for the count, as did Mr. Compress. Nejire aimed a blast at an agitated Shigaraki and a rapidly approaching Toga, whilst Izuku placed his hands on the ground, together the two of them unleashing powerful attacks. Nejire managed to knock out Shigaraki. And whilst Toga managed to dodge the main impact of the blast, she was still flung back as it hit her arm, and Izuku unleashed a nasty shock to Magni, Twice, Spinner and Dobby. It wasn't enough to render any of them unconscious, but definitely enough to put them out of commission due to burns and extreme tissue damage. With the brief moment of peace, the two weren't that worried about All Might. Nejire looked over to Izuku and noticed his full condition. Ignoring burns and injuries not treated from the camp, his eyes were bloodshot and twitchy, and he seemed to flinch at anything too bright. Of course, his quirk takes a lot out of him, and he must have been charging for so long. On top of not getting a chance to sleep, he must be in some serious pain. She gazed at him gently, and he gave a shaky smile back. She buried her worry for now as they turned back towards the now incapacitated villains, only to see something that caused a peak in their worries. It seemed the main villain had used a special red stick whilst All Might was talking, or being scolded by the elder hero. The red stick stabbed into an unconscious Kurogiri, and a purple portal opened nearby. Izuku noticed the man had his wrist in a peculiar position, prepared to use some quirk to flick the League of Villains through the portal and away. The couple reacted quickly, Nejire bracing a powerful blast, whilst Izuku sent a shock through the ground. Nejire's blast destroyed the stick before whilst Izuku sent a shock through the ground into All for One. Whilst Nejire did successfully destroy the red stick, Izuku's green lightning on the other hand, seemed to barely tickle the villain. I'm too weak to do anything, so I'll just have to help Nejire and All Might the best I can, Izuku thought to himself as the man turned to face them. It was the first time they got a good look at him since coming here, and it seemed All Might was about to spring back into action. Nejire watched the man seem to sigh before he spoke. "Oh, youthful heroes in love I see. How adorable. Oh well." He finished, lazily raising his arm to them. Nejire's eyes whitened when she saw the outline of a large air blast being formed, racing their way. She closed her eyes and braced herself for impact. Instead, she felt a breeze, static, and heard a large crashing sound as Izuku had dived in front. She quickly opened her eyes and could see his hands cupped, lightning arcing off of him. The air was warm, indicating he had used his quirk to do something. She was about to ask when the man fired another air blast, this one larger and faster. Izuku repeated the action, though this time was much stronger if the deafening crash was anything to go by. It seemed to disperse the other attack, forming a green lightning barrier of sorts. She wanted to admire it, but knew now was hardly the time to do so. Instead, she flew above him and fired her strongest energy wave at the villain. However, beyond slightly tinging the man's suit, it did nothing to deter him. Nejire grit her teeth and fired another shot, ignoring the recoil in her arms and slight drowsiness. Izuku seemed slightly distressed at this, and held his hand up to signal her to stop. She knew that was the right thing to do, and sighed as she landed behind him. By this point, All Might had launched himself and tried clocking the villain across the face with a powerful punch. The villain, in turn, leaned backwards and launched another air bullet, this time directed at All Might. All Might, unable to counter the blow in time, braced himself. Nejire and Izuku could only watch helplessly as All Might tanked shot after shot. Nejire couldn't stand the helplessness, fired another shot at the villain, much to the dismay of Izuku. After doing so, the villain turned his head to look at the students, whilst preparing a much larger blast for All Might, who had to unleash a powerful attack to counter it. Whilst All Might was caught up in that, the villain turned to face the students. He seemed to lock onto Izuku's face, but lacking eyeballs it was hard to tell. After seemingly contemplating for a little while, he raised his hand. As he did so, he seemed to activate a different quirk. One that seemed familiar to Izuku. Nejire watched as for a brief second, his eyes clouded slightly as though reliving a moment, a memory of days long past. There was a brief smile on his face that reached his eyes, and Nejire could only wonder what it was of, and what had triggered it. She turned her attention back to the villain, and by now he had seemingly figured out what he was doing, and chunks of debris began rising. At first it was nothing more than crushed cans and destroyed laptops, but soon it became large stone pillars. Nejire prepared to shoot them down when Izuku beat her to the punch. He had completely obliterated every prepared projectile, and Nejire turned to face Izuku. But he wasn't flashing his usual green. Instead of light green, it was a condensed dark green. The lightning crackling off of him was so hot Nejire could see the waving air immediately near him, and after looking at his face, she couldn't help but fear her boyfriend. Izuku was angry. Well, not quite. He was mad, yes, but he was far more upset, grieving brought up once more, and happy memories ripped away from him. Despite his extreme emotions, he did his best to keep his cool, and channeled his intense emotions into his quirk. In doing so, it condensed the lightning into a more powerful, raw force of nature. With little more than a flick of his left hand, he was able to immediately destroy all the gathered debris with a dark green lightning. If he knew the much louder sounds were making his headache worse, he definitely didn't show it, as he braced to launch himself as soon as All Might threw his punch. He barely glanced at Nejire, who seemed to read his mind, shaking her head with pleading eyes. In response, Izuku gave a short smile that seemed to read as an apology, before launching in. All Might had just been blasted away as Izuku jumped forwards, miraculously taking All For One by surprise, as he jumped onto the man's back. Before All For One could react, Izuku clamped his hands down on the man's shoulders, and using that to stay stable, he grit his teeth, and began sending his newly condensed green lightning through him. The man did seem to react, freezing up slightly as Izuku grit his teeth more, the deep green lightning becoming more condensed as Izuku sent more. Large scorch marks also appearing on the ground from those that arced off of him. Unfortunately for Izuku, All For One managed to manipulate a bone-based quirk, and used it to lengthen his left shoulder blade. This resulted in it gouging into Izuku's right wrist, and he could feel the two bones touching inside. Ignoring the pain, he thought fast and decimated the intruding object, before falling back onto the ground behind All For One. Izuku fell down to the ground, lying on the ground clutching his wrist as he registered the pain. All For One turned to face the boy, not noticing Nejire quietly tying up and putting League of Villain members out of the way, as he was more focused on All Might and the other hero students. All Might launched a fist at All For One's face, who countered it with a shock inversion quirk, as he began talking to Izuku. "Ah, I believe I recognize you now." Although I'm sure you already noticed considering the use of your belated mother's quirk. Such a shame, she was so weak with it. I believe, Inko Midoriya, correct. All for one spoke, and Izuku just gritted his teeth. His quirk's arcs began increasing at the mention of his mother's name, with him being half shrouded by the deep green lightning. She tried to use it to protect herself. Oh, what a shame. May have accidentally crushed her skull whilst taking her quirk, but no matter. Izuku's quirk's lightning began increasing exponentially, him being shrouded further. To the side, Nejire was lining up a shot, but couldn't get an accurate one without potentially hitting Izuku, as she grit her teeth to stop herself from sobbing, as she heard the details of what happened to his true parents. Meanwhile, All Might was clenching his fist tight, breathing heavy. He probably didn't have too much longer before time would be up, but he had to keep fighting. So that was your preliminary appearance to our fight. Just had to ruin more lives? All Might asked. All for one shrugged and replied. It was many years before our battle, but of course, yes, it was to try and draw you out. Now where was I? He finished, turning back to Izuku. The smirk on his face was vicious, and he continued, now, Hisashi Midoriya's reaction was much like yours. Pure rage. Shame his quirk was useless though, I ended up putting it into a Nomu. As he was, really, didn't do anything other than tap me. All for one finished taunting, smiling a cruel grin at Izuku, who was hunched over. It was at this point his dark green lightning died down, his quirk deactivating as a quiet sobbing came from him. All for one seemed satisfied, and was about to speak again before All Might attacked him once more. Oh All Might, you're running out of time. Why don't you leave me and your student to talk for a little, All for one said, aiming a palm towards a helicopter flying overhead. He quickly launched an air shot at it, and All Might grit his teeth tight as he prepared to jump. Before he launched, Nejire had already shot into the air and made it to the side of the helicopter. She managed to push the helicopter out of the way, but got hit instead. All for one chuckled, and All Might prepared to go catch her before an absolutely deafening crash was heard. All Might snapped his head to look at All for one, who seemed equally surprised, and the two turned to where Izuku was. In his place was a large scorch mark, and the two remained in the abrupt truth as they looked to the sky. Despite the dark night, they could make out a small blur, a blur of a shade of green so dark it was almost black. The blur soon came to a stop somewhere in the sky, before it began rocketing back down to Earth. It took barely a few moments to return, Nejire knocked out and cradled in Izuku's arms as he crashed back down. He gently laid her on the ground before turning back to All for one. All Might could feel a tremendous pressure coming from Izuku, and couldn't help but fear the student as he stepped towards the villain, lightning crackling off of him at each step. All for one, your fight with me is hardly beginning. Every step Izuku took caused small craters, each step causing two large bolts of dark green lightning to rise into the air. All Might backed away from the student, but All for one seemed unfazed as he simply stared down the boy. Izuku didn't flinch, instead launching towards All for one, left hand pulled back to hook the man across the face with a powerful punch, fueled by his condensed lightning. The man, taken by surprise, staggered back and raised a hand to his now bruised cheek. He was surprised that such a boy could even compare to All Might, let alone land a blow before the muscular man could. Before the man could say or even raise a finger, another blow landed on the other side of his face, a right hook this time. With the impact, he felt static and heat coming off of the boy's fist, slightly burning his face. Despite a burn-resistance quirk, he still made a burn mark from his quirk without trying. What a wonderful quirk. It'll make a wonderful addition to my collection, All for one thought, giving off a sinister smirk. All for one backed away briefly as All Might continued his struggle to maintain form, whilst Izuku prepared another attack. This time when the boy launched forward, All for one used a combination of bone manipulation and extreme flexibility to catch the boy off guard, shooting out an extended upper arm bone, after bending his forearm the wrong way to expose it. The boy simply used a short blast from his quirk to halt his momentum, and moved to the side of the protruding bone. Quicker than his eyes could watch, and with several deafening crashes of lightning to follow, the boy then landed on the protruding bone and shattered it when he used it as a jump board. The boy's eyes locked onto All for one, and for the first time in centuries, the man of many quirks felt the slightest sense of intimidation. He quickly took that mind box and crushed it, using a telescopic quirk to shrink his torso into his lower body, with the idea of letting the boy fly over him. And it did work, kind of. Izuku did in fact end up flying over him. That was a plus. The negative was that Izuku did end up still hitting him. Just because he was really old, doesn't mean that being hit in the junk didn't hurt. And Izuku continued to follow through with the punch for a good meter before landing on the ground. Izuku quickly jumped back, a small crater forming as he backed away from the currently hunched over villain. Damn, I may not have been injured, but that fucking hurt, holy hell, All for One thought as he stood back up, limping a little. He turned around and chuckled darkly, using the joint flexibility to turn his head like an owl. Well, young hero, I may have underestimated you. Your quirk seems wonderful, I am awfully tempted to keep it. Alas, I am old and learning new quirks is hard, but Inomu would do wonderfully with it. Whilst All for One was talking, All Might came from his right, landing a blow on his left cheek, because Alnak. All Might was steaming heavily at this point, and All for One knew he had maybe one more punch before reverting. His smirk grew, and despite him not having eyes, it was easy to see it was a genuine smile, even if it was one of cunning. All for One did however recoil at the blow, and could out of the corner of his eye, see Izuku charging up another attack, as the boy was in a sprinter's stance, waiting for a moment to strike. All for One kept an eye on Izuku, albeit metaphorically, as he floated back into the sky to stare down All Might. And All Might. I must say, you're incredibly persistent, All for One said, going through what was effectively a list of quirks as he prepared himself, although I would definitely appreciate my brother's power back. You may have been a worthy inheritor of it to him, but if only he had stayed by my side. A world order of chaos. I am going to stop you today. All Might cut him off and declared. All for One, still watching the braced Izuku, recalled a memory. Oh, you know who else said that? Your predecessor, none other than NonEuclideanHuman. Oh, of all the inheritors, she was by far the least worthy. She said the exact same thing, the cough and all. Of course, this was because I has punctured her lung with, I believe it was with some cactus thorn quirk. Honestly, it was pathetic. All for One taunted, using two of his fingers to push the corners of his mouth up into a smile. All for One watched gleefully as it had the desired effect on All Might, the massive man's eyes glinting with anger and rage. All Might cocked a fist back, fully prepared to punch, and was about to when Izuku stopped it with a single hand. You only have one effective punch. I can tell. Save it to take this guy down, not waste it in anger. Izuku said, not looking at the man as he kept piercing green eyes locked onto All for One. All Might sighed, and brought his fist to eye level, seemingly reminiscing. You are right, young man. Thank you, All Might started, before Izuku cut him off. Thank me later, let's defeat this guy first, Izuku told him. I'll make an opening. You need to exploit it. All Might nodded in response, and a booming laughter echoed off of All for One. Oh, you are determined, courageous and impressive young hero. However, your mind is clouded by other things. For example, All for One started, raising his right arm and pointing it to Nejire as his arm charged with various muscle enhancers, multipliers, etc. before eventually resulting in a massive arm. You're blinded by love. With that, All for One used an air bullet. Although this time, it was much stronger, larger, and faster. For Izuku, time slowed down. Every heartbeat felt like an hour, and his heart rate was well over 150 beats per minute. Haha, quirk make heartbeat go brrrrrr. Author. He saw Nejire barely awakening, not even moments before the shot was fired, and still really groggy. She didn't even notice the air bullet flying towards her. Izuku's lightning increased tenfold as he jumped towards her. His initial jump contained both power from his legs, but also as he jumped, he unleashed massive lightning strikes from both of his feet. Each one caused a crater as it contacted the ground, propelling him faster as he tried to reach there. The lightning strikes, moments after, caused thunderous waves of sound that could be seen affecting rubble further away, but he paid it no mind. As time continued in slow motion, Izuku could see the air bullet approaching out of the peripheral of his eye. He could see Nejire's developing shocked expression as she began registering at, and he could feel the stretch in his arms, as he reached for the fabric of the sleeve of her hero costume. He could feel a wave of relief wash over him as he could feel the soft fabric, using it to pull her towards him. Izuku continued flying until he was completely in front of her. He could see the air bullet reaching so close he could feel the slight wind in front of it. There wasn't time to move both of them out of the way. The best he could do was stop in front of Nejire, and wrap his arms around her as he shielded them with his back. I love you, he whispered. Nejire's face began changing from one of shock, to fear, to worry as she saw the bullet behind him. She didn't even have time to respond when it finally made contact, hitting him hard across the whole of his back, and causing the two teens to tumble several meters away, Izuku still somehow shielding her from each landing, until they came to a stop. Izuku could feel cuts on him, rubbing against, well, he was still wearing the less than durable t-shirt and shorts, the former now shredded and offering little warmth and privacy, as the sleeves were practically gone, and the rest looking like a tiger, had gone ahead and clawed it. He could feel each flap of fabric stinging against sections of his torn skin, mostly his back, as he used that along with a last-ditch effort from his quirk to go against the bullet, to some success. It was less than it would have been, but still was far worse than one of the not turbocharged air bullets, to shield them. He could feel his own heartbeat slow as Nejire sped up, her fully waking and beginning to panic as she realized what happened. It was all Izuku could do to kiss her cheek before his eyes fluttered shut. Meanwhile, after All For One had fired the shot, he turned back towards the seething All Might. Ah, the frailty and exploitability of teenagers. How disappointing, the world's greatest hero needing to rely on a couple of heroes in training to fight his battles, All For One taunted, pointing his buffed-up arm at All Might. Oh well. Now, to finish you off. As he said this, air could be seen rushing between the spikes of bones and ridges of pulsating muscle on his arm, charging an air bullet out front. Little air vortexes could be seen, preparing to propel the bullet forward as All Might braced himself. The moment All For One released it, a powerful yellow blast hit his arm, forcing the blast to harmlessly shoot into an already destroyed building. The two opposites turned towards the source of a shot to see Nejire, her hero costume tattered and dusty, but her face filled with emotion. Behind her they could see Izuku's body, laid on its side, an ever so faint rise and fall of his chest, indicating his slight life. However, in their brief distraction, Nejire had already charged up 2 more shots, highly powerful and one on both hand, as she pointed it towards All For One. Without another word, she fired them in quick succession, the first causing All For One to flinch, the second causing him to be thrown back slightly. She didn't stop there as she charged up 2 more shots, and jumped to stand directly in front of All For One, side by side with All Might. From his position, All Might noticed that Nejire's jaw was tense tightly, small trails of tears down the center of her face. She fired the next 2 shots, each was causing her shoulders to be thrown back with recoil, as each one made contact with All For One's chest, pushing the man slightly further back, and causing him to hunch over slightly as he regained balance. Nejire was about to fire another shot when All Might stopped her. She didn't say anything, simply glared at him, almost piercing straight into his soul. He steeled his nerves before he explained. I can take him down with the last of my power. However, you will need to make an opening, and then shield young Izuku from the blow, All Might explained, clenching his right fist. Nejire gave a short and sharp nod, indicating that she heard as she fired the shorts again, each one seemingly to be stronger than the other. All For One was being forced further back, a small trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. It soon disappeared, however, as he utilized it with some blood-based quirk, creating spears that shot towards the duo of student and teacher. Nejire fired a barrage of small shots to each, destroying and scattering them before aiming back to All For One. Rather than firing 2 powerful shots, however, she opted to fire a barrage of 12 shots. One after the other, alternating arms as each became more powerful, the last few shots becoming blinding to look at. All For One managed to dodge the first 2, which forced him into position for the next 10. The first 3 hit his right arm, forcing it out of the power-up state, as the next 2 felt like they dislocated that arm, putting it out of commission in his current state. Then, each knee was hit by 3 shots, forcing them backwards with a sickening crunch as he toppled down. The final one of the barrage cycle hit him in his stomach, causing him to cough some blood up. However, Nejire wasn't done. Covering All Might as he charged forward, she put her hands together, and she glowed brightly with the yellow energy as it swirled around her arms. Faintly, she said, "Eat maximum charge, bitch," unheard by All Might as he continued through the air. Nejire fired her shot as All Might landed, hitting All For One in the chest, forcing him to cough out a massive amount of blood. Nejire then jumped towards Izuku and cradled him, holding his unconscious body tight, as a massive gust of wind picked up, along with All Might's cry of United States of Smaiaish, and a powerful impact being heard, almost snapping All For One's neck. All Might stood over All For One's defeated body, a large indent in the man's cheek, whilst Nejire held onto Izuku, shooting down flying debris, and barely holding on to her footing as the massive tornado-worthy gust of wind died down. She paid no attention to the massive man's steaming and sudden transformation being exposed to the world, opting to keep her eyes locked on the boy in her arms, as though he may simply turn into dust. The hospital white room was agonizing. Nejire sat in a chair next to the bed, only just allowed inside the room. After the massive battle, she focused on getting Izuku medical attention, which was offered with no effort as she flew to the nearest hospital. However, she was quickly, and somewhat forcefully, ripped away from her beloved as they said that there were tests to be run, x-rays to be taken, and potential surgeries to be completed, as Izuku was quickly wheeled away, and Nejire directed to a different room. After she was cleared with some heavy bruising to her ribs that were given accelerated healing using rudimentary healing quirks, she pestered the receptionist until Izuku was given a room. Apparently, there were a few stress fractures, along with large gashes and cuts that needed stitches, along with a concussion, infected leg wound, and sores on his wrists. It was hard to tell how old some of these things were, and it was clear he was in a bad state. All of that was bad enough on its own, but coupled with the extreme quirk overuse, the doctors and nurses in charge were currently occupied running a plethora of tests on his state. But right now, Nejire could at least see him, if not hold his hand. One was hooked up to a variety of medical machinery, keeping track of dozens of statistics regarding his welfare, whilst the other was attached to a blood transfusion. Her eyes watered and the back of her throat burned as she sat next to her love, her eyes gazing over his all too still body. 10 minutes passed, and soon the overwhelming stillness of the room became too much for Nejire as she was overwhelmed by her thoughts. She broke down in tears, face on Izuku's still chest, covered by sheets, her sobbing shaking her slightly as the tears stained the sheets, making them a slightly deeper shade of the hospital white. After 5 minutes, she felt a hand gently combing her hair, and didn't bother to look up. She knew it wasn't Izuku, his arms may or may not be pinned, but her sobbing did begin to subside slightly. "It's alright sweetie, let it out." Soon, Nejire sat back up to meet eyes with a blonde woman, looking quite young with spiky hair. "Sniff Mrs. Bakugo?" she asked, eyes red and still wet. The lady nodded solemnly. "Please, call me Mitsuki, that makes me feel old. I was on my way to release Katsuki from the hospital when I heard my other son managed to get into some serious trouble. Anyway, I take it you're the Nejire Hato this one talked about all the time." Nejire, despite the somberness, still blushed at that. I guess." Mitsuki chuckled and smiled sadly at him. "Yeah, he calls often. He told me he got locked in a room and forced to confess." Nejire smiled at the memory, before something came to her attention. "The all-for-one villain, he said he murdered Izuku's parents, so he's officially a Midoriya. But we adopted him as his godparents, Masaru and myself. Did good, he rubbed off, somewhat on Katsuki, and I'm thankful Katsuki didn't rub off too much on him. But he's family, and you effectively are too." Nejire blushed, looking away from Mitsuki. The mother pulled out something from her handbag, and handed it to Nejire. It was a green bento box, fairly full. "I had brought this for Izuku once he got out, but you know. You could probably use it though, and he'd want you to have it anyway. Keep positive sweetie, he'll pull through. Now I gotta go pick up my biological brat," Mitsuki said, getting up to leave. Nejire nodded, thanking her and bidding her farewell, as Nejire stared down at the green bento box. She opened it and picked at it. She hadn't eaten since lunch. For whatever reason she worked better on an empty stomach, but she had no appetite for food right now. She could tell it was heavily seasoned, and at any other time would be delicious, if a little spicy, but right now it was bland and simply something to keep her going. She was about halfway through the bento box when her own parents burst through the door. "Oh my little girl, we were so worried," her dad said somewhat loudly, whilst her mother nodded alongside. Nejire quickly hushed them in fear of being kicked out. They both apologized before turning towards the boy in the bed. "This is him?" her mother asked softly, gently stroking Nejire's hair. Nejire just sniffled and nodded in response as her parents looked approvingly at the unconscious boy. "We saw everything that happened on TV. From his past to All Might's true form. He seems to care very much for you," her father chimed in, clasping her shoulder. "That's right, All Might's small might form. Who would have guessed?" Nejire thought. If she was being honest, she didn't even notice until they were being loaded into ambulances by emergency services, when the skinny man began talking to her. Unsurprisingly, she was far more concerned about the boy that remained clutched in her arms until they arrived into the hospital, but even then she carried him to his designated operation room. "You love him very much, don't you?" her mother asked, jolting Nejire out of her thoughts. Nejire nodded and sniffled more, tears threatening to leak out. "My little girl's all grown up. Well, once he's better, we look forward to meeting him once you two get a decent break from school." Her father cooed, and Nejire smiled, despite the threatening tears. "We'll leave you two in some peace. Rest well," her mother said, the two kissing their daughter on the forehead before leaving the hospital room. A total of half an hour had passed when a doctor came into the room. She looked at Nejire with a sympathetic glance as she hesitantly moved away. "It's alright Nejire-chan, you don't need to move away from your boyfriend. I just need to check the readings from the machinery," the doctor told her, to which Nejire responded quickly, laying her head back across the sheets. The doctor was taking some readings and briefly touched Izuku's forehead, much to Nejire's confusion, as Izuku's forehead briefly glowed. Nothing happened at first, but soon Nejire noticed the arm she was on trying to move. It brought her hope, but his eyes remained shut and breathing a constant slow. She didn't move further and stayed still as the hand eventually made its way to Nejire's head and began stroking her hair. Nejire couldn't help but give a small smile, and the doctor explained. "Sorry, that's just my quirk. I have a license to use it on a basis to help those with loved ones in comas. Basically, it allows me to trigger people's subconscious reactions, so long as they are positive and simple," the doctor explained. "So that means?" Nejire questioned, her head still on Izuku's chest. "Yes, this is his subconscious instinct. When you do that, it'll keep going until I either stop it or the trigger leaves. It doesn't take anything out of me to do. Would you like me to keep it going?" the doctor asked. Yes please," Nejire hummed back. Izuku may be in a coma for now, but she was still able to feel his care and affection. The doctor bowed and left the room, dimming the lights and leaving the couple alone. Nejire could see the very early signs of dawn coming along. "Is it that late? Well, early I guess," she thought, her eyes drooping. "Well, I could use the sleep. And this is nice. Maybe I can get him to do it more. Ooh, that sounds nice." Nejire's train of thought cleared for a rare time, the blue-haired girl content to just sleep as her love's hand drifted through her hair like fish to an ocean. Nejire woke up to a gentle shake off her shoulder. She mumbled 5 more minutes as she melted more into Izuku's subconscious hair stroking, having had gone on for all night, morning, her hair a weird mix of smooth yet ruffled. "Nejire, they're gonna tell us about Izuku's coma," Mirio said. Almost immediately Nejire shot up, the hand being pushed off and being laid to rest, still at Izuku's side. She couldn't help but feel sad and guilty at the loss of it, and she stared longingly at the hand before a slight giggle broke her thoughts. "Don't worry dearie, I can do it again. Just place your hand with his," the same doctor from yesterday told her. Nejire did so quickly, and the doctor activated a quirk on Izuku. Nejire's hand on Izuku's was clutched gently by a light grip, and small circles were rubbed on the back of her hand. She had to hold back tears from even this subtle action as she looked around the room. Bakugo, Yoirozu, Mirio, Tamaki, Mitsuki, her husband, and the doctors were currently present. The doctor that used her quirk seemed positive, yet Nejire could see there was something behind that. A slight tug to her smile downwards, the slight droop of her shoulders, her eyes that weren't quite affected by the smile she wore. The other doctor seemed a little sad, but continued to try his best to remain professional. "Well, his extreme quirk overuse combined with general lack of energy, we do not believe he slept or was fed during his time with the League of Villains, seems to have taken an extreme toll on his body. An energy deficit if you will. Combined with this he had several injuries, further depleting his energy. As such, we do not believe he will wake up from his coma for at least 3 months. I am sorry," the other doctor told them, bowing before leaving the room. The female doctor gave them a sympathetic smile, before closing the door behind her and leaving Izuku's family and friends in the room. Bakugo clenched his fist tightly, gritting his teeth and tears rolling down his cheeks, as Yoirozu had tears in her eyes whilst comforting the blonde boy. Mitsuki was crying into her husband's arms. Nejire figured she should learn his name at some point, whilst Mirio and Tamaki held each other with a general aura of depression. Last and furthest from least was Nejire. She was initially shell-shocked, the words not quite fully setting in. Subconsciously she gripped Izuku's hand tighter, her emotions triggering her quirk to wrap around her. Her quirk wrapped around her like ribbons, bright yellow streams blinding anyone who looked at her. "Nejire. Nejire." Several of the others in the room tried to get her attention, but to no success as her emotions grew in strength, and the bands of her quirk moving faster and appearing denser. None dared touch them, despite them appearing harmless. They were mesmerizing, and soon all other occupants were watching the beautiful display, albeit through tears. Nejire's emotions intensified further as her mind strayed to every moment spent with the comatose boy, from their dates to beforehand, when they were just friends. Just friends, more like weird almost dating, but not quite, Nejire thought before returning to more upsetting thoughts. All the moments I can't share with him, all the dates we can't go on. And it's at least 3 months. It could be longer. Nejire's sobbing grew as she clutched his hand tighter, and at this point, from the connected hands, the yellow energy began slowly spreading to Izuku, wrapping tight around him. From large one across the connected arms, spread dozens of smaller ones, coiling around Izuku's body. Each resulting strand ended up winding around his limbs, the bright yellow shimmering vividly. They coiled so tight, it seemed to merge with Izuku, appearing the way his own quirk would against the inside of his skin. Soon it spread all over, causing him to appear as though his skin was glowing lightly, with a yellow that seemed reminiscent of the sun. Bright, hopeful, warm, and loving. Soon his own quirk activated, the green lightning dancing in tandem with the yellow of Nejire's quirk. The intricate art of the two quirks made a beautiful pattern, and some of the medical monitors began spiking. None of his vitals, however, instead his quirk monitors. Each one, formerly at zeros and negatives, began climbing quickly, rising to low levels. It wasn't much, but his body seemed quick to respond, converting the quirk energy back into energy for himself. Oh my god, Mitsuki muttered as Izuku's heartbeat began speeding up, returning to normal levels. Nejire's quirk soon died down, and her sobbing continued as she held Izuku tight. Izuku was now holding her, hugging her tightly. It's okay Nejire, it's okay. Izuku had been released from the hospital finally. Although he was almost completely healed, his energy stores seemed to be damaged, albeit temporarily. Chances are it would exponentially increase though, along with his output. But for now, he would be restricted from being allowed to do any physical training, and Nejire had promised to Izuku, Red threatened, that she would keep him from doing anything even remotely resembling that. Regardless, he was in his mother's car as she drove him back to the dorms, the two sharing a comfortable silence. Oh and sweetie. She called up as they pulled up to the entrance of UA, take care of that Nejire girl. Izuku blushed and nodded, waving his mother goodbye as he got out the car. Once the car left, he walked through the entrance and back towards the dorms. As he walked, he was met with a gentle, flying hug from Nejire, who proceeded to cling to his arm for the rest of the walk, and a bro hug from both Tamaki and Mirio. The group walked together to the one at dorms, where Mirio and Tamaki bid the other couple farewell, as they continued towards the three at dorms whilst Nejire, still, wouldn't give Izuku's arm back, not until she was sure he was safe. Most of the class were in their dorms doing their own thing, as it was mid-afternoon and none wanted to do anything particularly pressing. However, waiting in the main room for Izuku were Todoroki, Iida, Bakugo and Yoirozu. Additionally, Aizawa-sensei was in the kitchen, making himself coffee as he needed to talk to the problem child. But, contrary to popular belief, he wasn't heartless, and would let his students, children, have their moment first. Anyway, Nejire and Izuku walked through the one at dorms where the rest of his friends were waiting. Hi guys. He called out, getting their attention. The conversation dropped, before Iida rushed over and began checking over Izuku. Once Izuku reassured Iida that the fussing was unnecessary, Iida straightened himself, before firmly placing his hands on Izuku's shoulders. Then be more careful. He yelled at Izuku whilst shaking the boy, who just kind of let it happen whilst Nejire, Yoirozu and Bakugo were having their own discussion nearby. Todoroki meanwhile was chuckling quietly under his hand. I have to agree with Iida Izuku. Please take better care of yourself. Hey, I didn't choose to fight all for one. He exclaimed in defense, putting his hands up. You could have left. Todoroki replied, looking blankly at Izuku. Anyway, did I miss anything? Izuku asked the two, who both shook their head, before Izuku snapped his fingers. Oh, you both need to pay up. What? Iida and Todoroki exclaimed, both surprised. Izuku proceeded to gesture to Bakugo and Yoirozu's intertwined hands. When was it? He asked them. The night after you were kidnapped, which makes it, Iida began counting on his fingers. My night. Izuku cut in. Todoroki and Iida scat and begrudgingly both handed him the appropriate sums of money. Yo, what the fuck Izuku? Bakugo screamed, at least cut me in some. Fine fine, you get 25%, Izuku responded, handing him some of the bills. Yoirozu and Nejire both rolled their eyes as Bakugo pocketed the cash and smirked. I still can't believe Iida agreed to betting on this, Todoroki mentioned, and Izuku nodded. I believed it would have been a worthwhile investment opportunity. It appears I was wrong, Iida said, adjusting his glasses. Neither can I. Aizawa-sensei said as he walked into the living room. All students jumped slightly at his sudden presence, as he turned towards Izuku. Normally I would scold you for running a betting ring around relationships, but the teachers do the same. Anyway, Izuku, welcome back. Thank you Aizawa-sensei, Izuku replied, still a little taken aback, and mildly unsure. Is there something you need? Yes actually, you see considering your high intellect from the exams and the doctor's orders, Aizawa-sensei explained, looking at Nejire when he said the latter part, you won't be able to participate in the classwork for the first few days. So instead, you'll be working with me? Nezu exclaimed, popping out from within Aizawa-sensei's scarf. Ah, Principal Nezu sir. Izuku jumped suddenly and bowed. Aizawa-sensei rolled his eyes, and Nezu didn't react as he simply smiled. Come with me and we'll discuss your training for the first few days. Nezu hopped down and began walking out of the dorms. Izuku shrugged and quickly bid farewell to his friends, brother and girlfriend, as he followed the surprisingly quick animal. So, where are we going? Izuku asked as they began climbing the stairs. There were a lot. Well, I have a special office for teaching effectively. So we'll be heading there, and outline a basic study and theoretical work schedule for you. Nezu said, his smile not faltering once. If Izuku was being really honest, it was a tad unnerving. That Nezu's gaze always seemed to lock onto his hair, always for a moment too long. Honestly, if it weren't for his quirk he wouldn't even notice. Eventually, the two reached Nezu's teaching office where there were several whiteboards set up, a few textbooks open, an open computer, what appeared to be several different research projects set up, and a miniature testing chamber of sorts. Nezu hopped up quite literally onto his desk and flipped open a timetable, which he handed to Izuku. Now, we are going to do a blitz of physics subjects that are compatible with your quirk. Nezu started, cheerfully waving his hands around. I would personally like to see more heroes using more science-based techniques or attacks, and would like to integrate a dedicated class for this. Izuku nodded in understanding. A society with smarter, more complex heroes would have much stronger heroes with far higher skill ceiling, allowing for more heroes with all might levels of potential. Nezu finished, rubbing his paws together, and I would like to reach this society. To do this I would like to integrate a new program into UA, one that specializes in teaching students subjects that can highly improve their quirk. I'm sure you can think of plenty of examples within your own class. Izuku nodded, and he could think of plenty. Jiro learning the physics behind sound waves, Shoji learning more biology, Mina learning chemistry, and Koto learning classification to name a few. However, I need a student to spearhead this project. And, after taking your quirk into consideration, I would like to work with you for this. Nezu said. Wait, Principal Nezu, why me though? Izuku asked, surprised by the sudden events of the day. Well, to be quite honest Izuku, your quirk has the most potential in this. Green lightning itself is one thing, but the ways you've used it so far continue to impress, and I believe there is still so much more you can do with it. I believe you have started looking into polarization capacity, yes? Nezu explained. Indeed sir, I believe that using that I could create a barrier of some sorts. Izuku responded. Nezu placed a paw upon his chin, before responding. Indeed, that is a splendid idea. However, there is still so much more you can do with that idea alone. So Izuku, will you accept my direct tutelage? Nezu asked, holding a paw out. Izuku didn't even hesitate as he grabbed Nezu's paw, gently shaking it. The paw, he was careful not to completely shake Nezu himself. I look forward to it Principal Nezu. Izuku said, beaming. As do I. Please look over these schedules and textbooks for theory preparation, and we'll be able to get started as soon as possible. Nezu said, smiling as well. Izuku quickly picked up the textbooks, and almost dropped them because he was not expecting it to be about a dozen kilos, before bowing a last time as he backed out of the room. He lugged them down the stairs, and although it was a slow process he knew it would be worth it. Once he finally made it back to the dorms, Nejire had already left back to her own dorms. Although if his phone blowing up was anything to go by, she already missed him, and several other class members had come down to start cooking dinner. Currently it was Sero, Sato and Shoji, or just hang out. From the sound of it, Kaminari was absolutely destroying Bakugo in Mario Kart, and Yoyorozu had to hold the angrier blonde back whilst Jiro was filming. Izuku was greeted by everyone there, and although everyone did visit him once he woke up, it was his first time back at the dorms. Izuku smiled and thanked everyone as he made his way through, before Kirishima spoke up. Yo, Izu bro, what are you carrying? Oh, since I can't participate in the class training for the first few days, Nezu has offered to help tutor me, Izuku said, pulling out one of his schedules from the pile of books. The principal Nezu. Isn't he terrifying or something? Mineta screamed, before he was whacked by both Yoyorozu and Bakugo. Shut the fuck up you little twerp. Bakugo screamed. Yoyorozu simply nodded in agreement with a disappointed look. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at the change in both their behaviors, overall being positive. Probably. I mean, Yoyorozu being more aggressive is good because she's more assertive, but probably gonna scare off some people, but will terrify Mineta so it's great. Bakugo being more quiet and cunning is probably really good for him as a hero, but is also going to terrify some people. But yeah, he's not really scary, and I think we got along alright. He has some really cool ideas that I hope to try out. Izuku said, showing them the schedule. Some eyes widened at the proposed content, involving incredibly complex particle physics, some of which had only been discovered or proven with the advent of quirks. Dude, what do you think Nezu means when he says hair nesting? Kaminari spoke up. Izuku froze, paling slightly as he heard that. You know how he always pops out of Aizawa-sensei's scarf? Izuku asked. Bakugo burst out laughing, hunched over as he understood, and Yoirozu had to hide her own chuckles. Similarly, Iida and Todoroki were supporting each other as they laughed, and several other students were holding their own laughter in. The more outspoken students, mostly Mina, were rolling on the ground with laughter, while Izuku paled completely, slightly frozen. I'm sure it will be worthwhile overall, Izuku said, losing some of his earlier confidence. Yeah, worthwhile for blackmail, you fucking nerd. Bakugo hollered. None of the more studious students were in a condition where they could scold him for his language, as they all were in various states of being hunched over. Soon everyone calmed down, and Izuku carried the schedule and textbooks into his room, dumping them onto his desk. When he dropped it down, it kicked up dust and he sighed. He grabbed a cloth and wiped down the desk and several surfaces in his room, making sure it wasn't too dusty. It didn't take too long, and Izuku headed back out, dropping the cloth in the laundry basket as he passed. Once he made it down, most everyone was already seated and eating together. Izuku sat at one of the tables with Bakugo, Iida, Todoroki, and Yoirozu where they sat together, discussing the plans for the next few days. Well, you were unconscious. Aizawa-sensei introduced to us the goal of super move training for the last week of academic break, but he didn't really explain what, Yoirozu said, whilst Izuku hummed thoughtfully. Well, do you guys have any ideas? Izuku asked them. All the students at the table thought for a moment before Bakugo spoke first. Well, I already have the Howitzer impact, but I need something that's powerful and more accurate, he explained. Well, personally I would like to have a powerful combination move, beyond the giant ice wall, Todoroki added, gazing at his left hand. And similarly to Todoroki's ideas for balance, I need to have some form of ranged move. Perhaps some kind of gust storm, or airstrikes with my kicks, Iida said, chopping the air which Bakugo and Yoirozu had to dodge. The new couple was sitting together. With my own quirk it is difficult to create such a super move, Yoirozu said, looking embarrassed. How about you go to the support department, see if they have any interesting blueprints you could use? Izuku suggested. Yoirozu seemed to perk up at this, and Bakugo spoke his own suggestion. Yeah, you could get like, a rocket launcher or some shit. How cool would that be? He yelled. Yoirozu proceeded to slap him for his language, before sighing. You're not wrong. However, I would prefer something more accurate. A laser of sorts perhaps. The two went back and forth for a while. Bakugo was fixated on some form of explosive item, whilst the other three boys continued their own conversation. Soon they finished and Sato brought out dessert, gathering all students around Izuku's table, much to the green-haired boy's embarrassment. To our whole, reunited Class 1A. Sato declared, and all the students cheered in agreement. Izuku smiled. His class was happy he was back, and he was definitely happy to be back as well. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.